Hello, everyone. Eric Grenier here, and welcome to the 124th episode of the Writ Podcast. It's been more than a week since Chrystia Freeland presented the federal budget, and we still don't technically know if it will pass a vote in the House, as Jagmeet Singh of the NDP hasn't committed to supporting it. Is that just a bluff? And the Liberals do seem to be hoping to get a bump out of the budget, but everything that we've seen so far from the polls suggests it's not happening yet. But how is that strategy going to play out? To break down the federal scene in Ottawa, I'm joined this week by the Toronto Star's Stephanie Levitz and Wherry of the CBC. Thanks to both of you for being here.
Hello.
Happy to be here.
You've really sounded, Aaron. I'm happy to.
All the energy will build as the episode goes on.
Yeah, okay. So we do need to start with whether this budget is actually going to pass. The House wasn't sitting this week, so there wasn't any vote. Presumably there'll be a vote next week. The NDP has said that they're not committed to supporting it just yet. It's not a decision that they've made. Aaron, is this just a bluff? What do you think is going on with the NDP?
I don't know. To me, so first of all, I guess it's a bit bewildering to me that we're in this position of debating whether the NDP is going to support it. You know, the Liberals and the NDP have a confidence in supply agreement, and the terms of that deal are, if the Liberals agree to do some things, the NDP will vote to keep them in power. And so it's not quite clear to me what the issue is at this point. You know, like a month ago, a little bit more than a month ago, these two parties got together and came to an agreement on pharmacare. And presumably the NDP wants to see that program implemented. And the only way for it to be implemented is for the government to stay in power. So I don't know what we're doing right now. If the NDP is looking, Steph's colleague, Mark Ramsey, had a good piece, I think last night or today's paper, saying, maybe the NDP should hold out and try to get more money for the Canada Disability Benefit. If that's something they want to hold out for or push for, I think there might be some merit to that. But they haven't come out and said what their demands are or what they're waffling over or what the issue is. So it's not quite clear to me what we're doing here. Like, I think I've said this before, but sometimes it feels like the political parties and maybe even the press gallery don't know how to deal with a world in which there's not an election threat every week. And so I don't know why Jagmeet Singh didn't kind of just come out after the budget and say, we don't love everything in here. We think they could do things differently, but we want to see pharmacare implemented. So yeah, we're probably going to support the budget, and then we could all move on. Other than that, I just don't know what the reasoning is that we're kind of in this weird little limbo right now.
I tend to believe that people are smart enough to see some of the strategy that's going on. So if they do end up just voting for it anyway, I'm not sure what the advantage is, because I don't know if it's really fooling anybody unless they get something out of it. Stephanie, what do you think about what the NDP has been doing and what they're positioning themselves on here?
Yeah, I'll pick it up for where Aaron left off. I mean, the supply and confidence agreement is, as he articulated, they will support the government in exchange for action on their key priorities. Well, pharmacare is a key priority. Pharmacare is in the budget. So it doesn't make sense unless it is some kind of holdover reflex for the New Democrats to just reflexively say, well, we don't know, kind of forgetting that they had the sheet of paper that they signed. And, well, actually, do you really want to bring down the government? I mean, there's no... to be fair, yes, I guess a vote on a budget deal would be a non-confidence motion on the government. The government would fall. It's not like the NDP choosing not to align with the government on other things. Whether or not they're doing some kind of calculated, napkin math right now, saying, well, what if we didn't vote? Like, could we win an election? Obviously, the answer to that is no right now. And so why prolong the agony just to get more attention, which I guess sounds cynical, I suppose. Maybe there's room for them to extract something else on the disability benefit. Maybe they're mad about the capital gains, not being enough of a tax on the wealthy, which is something they've been calling for quite a bit and trying to frame some of their language around that. But I would suspect the New Democrats knew everything that was going to be in this budget. They also have a no surprises clause in their agreement. It's not as though there's anything in there that would have caught them off guard, including the disability benefit. That might be one where they're getting a lot of pressure from their stakeholders, but they've had a lot of pressure from their stakeholders on other things too, and they keep saying, well, yes, and we get pharmacare, and we got dental. So the comms on it just seem a bit backwards.
Aaron, is there substance to their concerns here?
So, I mean, I think on the capital gains tax issue, the NDP would have wanted a wealth tax, and they would probably argue that the capital gains tax doesn't go far enough. The flip side of that, based on an innumerable number of academic papers I've had to read over the last couple of days to understand capital gains taxation, is that there is a belief that actually trying to extract more from the wealthiest via a wealth tax you might be at the point of diminishing returns. So in terms of, if you're just looking to kind of rebalance economic inequality and extract more from the wealthiest, a capital gains might not be the worst way to go about doing it. So I don't know, the fact that the Liberals just chose a different way to do it, I don't know, I don't know that the NDP is going to want to fight an election over whether it should be a wealth tax or a capital gains tax. The Canada Disability Benefit, if that is something they're interested in fighting on, I think there is something more there, insofar as there are lots of voices who have said this was supposed to be a much more significant benefit, and the Liberals didn't put nearly enough money into it. Now, the Liberals might argue that there are provincial concerns and so on and so forth. But, there's at least a bit more of a straightforward argument there that the Canada Disability Benefit should be bigger, and therefore the Liberals should do something to fix that. But again, to come back to the point, do you want pharmacare or not? Like, if you made a deal on pharmacare and it's in, the only way to get it through is to keep this government in power and set it up and pass legislation, then you kind of have to go through with it. I just don't know why the NDP's put itself in this position of seeming to kind of waffle over an issue when they have seemingly as much to lose as the Liberals do right now.
The NDP and the waffle, Aaron, you're bringing up the waffle. I don't know.
It's true.
There is, if we're being completely technical about it, the NDP could always argue that pharmacare will still go ahead because they'll win an election and be able to implement it. But if we're being a bit more realistic based on where the polls are and everything like that, Stephanie, I once heard Brian Topp, he was on, I think, David Hurley's podcast, and he had said that if the NDP is able to deliver on some of these things like pharmacare, and in the next election they get run over the coals, they lose seats, it would still be worth it because something would come out of it. How do you feel the NDP is on that? The electoral prospects versus getting something out of this government, even if it means that they might pay for it later?
It boils down, I don't know who it was that said this. Maybe one of you guys know the source of this quote. The being, you either get into politics to be someone or you get into politics to do something. And it has seemed for quite some time, perhaps, that Jagmeet Singh came into federal politics to do some things. And if he can have a legacy as the leader of the New Democrats, as the leader at the time that the party managed to usher in pharmacare and they managed to get Canadians dental care, whether electoral victory is the thing that he is after is beside the point. He will have achieved a legacy for Canadians. And he talks a lot about that, right? He talks a lot about, I'm in it for Canadians. It's a lot of framing of how the party approaches a lot of things. That the politics of it are besides the point. They really want to deliver real results. I'm sort of parroting their lines here. And that's a fair enough argument, right? I mean, there's tons of backbenchers, if we want to be nice about it. There's tons of backbenchers in government, also in opposition parties, that don't get into politics to be a cabinet minister. They get into politics because they have a cause. They have something they really believe in firmly. They want to see it done, changed, amended, whatever it is, and they draw satisfaction from that. It's not a question of winning government. So if for the New Democrats that's enough, then okay, that's enough. And you have to imagine to some degree that it has to be enough, because if it wasn't, then you have to look at Jagmeet Singh and wonder why he's still leader, which is to say, taking the sort of crass, cynical view, a failure to meaningfully move the polls along again and again and again, losing seats in the last election. A bunch of his NDP MPs are now saying they're not running again. This should all circle around a question of, can Jagmeet Singh hang on as leader? But we're not having that conversation, right? The Conservatives would have tossed a leader out on their ear by now. The question of Justin Trudeau's leadership is sort of out in the ether. Is he staying? Is he going? Whatever. No one's talking about whether Jagmeet Singh is staying or going.
Aaron, do you think that depends on not the next election, but what happens in the next 16 months?
To a certain extent, I think it really will come down to the election. I mean, I think if the NDP doesn't, have significant gains in terms of seats, I think the conversation will immediately go to, well, does it make sense for Jagmeet Singh to hang on? And to go back to your question about political versus policy gains, like at this point, if you're Jagmeet Singh in the NDP, it doesn't look like you're getting any political gains, but you do have a chance to make some policy gains. So you might as well stick with the policy gains, it seems to me. And I don't think that's, the political calculus, like obviously the point of politics is to win seats and get a chance to do things. And, so it's not like you can totally excuse a failure to win seats. But I think if the NDP comes out of this with dental care and pharmacare and a few other things, the history books could be pretty kind to this version of the NDP and Jagmeet Singh. Tom Mulcair may have won more seats, but I don't think he has any policy he can point to. And, you would, if you're the NDP, you would hope that the policy gains would lead to political gains. But if you have to choose between the two, at the moment, it doesn't look like you're getting you're getting political gains. So you might as well take the policy gains.
Stephanie, do you sense that the Liberals have any appetite to actually bend or call the NDP on their bluff?
Do they need to? I suppose they could. I suppose they could enter into a public fight with their political bestie of the moment. I mean, the polls aren't exactly in their favor either. They have no desire, I'm sure, to head to an election, or perhaps they do. I mean, perhaps they want to just put this all to bed and move on. I doubt it. But I think not to put a stop to the conversation, but just goes back to why was Jagmeet Singh waffling in the first place, right? It doesn't make any sense. And if it's an effort to sort of politically distance himself a bit from the government, and every time the New Democrats sort of get jammed on something that's not, let's say, a confidence vote, and every time they try to vote against the government or push the government, the press gallery, everyone's like, well, okay, but you support the government, so what's your line in the sand? They've never really made that clear. Even on pharmacare, it's not quite what they set out to do, and they're like, oh yeah, but we're okay with that. We got this little thing here. So they've amended, they've fudged, they've danced enough times already that it's hard to imagine a scenario where the Liberals will just, call their bluff, because why do they need to? The NDP have folded every single other time.
Aaron, it does seem like the Liberals don't need to give them much based on the track record recently to get them to suddenly agree to the budget, if they have to give them anything at all.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think, in theory, the Liberals don't have to give them much, but I don't know that the Liberals have much room to give them much. If you go by, it might be silly or it might seem naive to take this government's fiscal targets as, serious things. But if you go by what their fiscal targets are in terms of $40 billion deficit in the current year and, deficits declining going forward and debt to GDP going down, this government isn't dealing with a ton of fiscal room right now. And that's, even after you assume that they're going to get a bunch of revenue from capital gains. So, even if they wanted to, double the amount of money that is available to the Canada Disability Benefit, for instance, I don't know that they've got the room for it without making some other moves. I get that just goes back to the question. I don't know how much bargaining room there is here at this point. I think for the Liberals there is, let's be fair. The Liberals don't have any reason to go to an election right now either. So it's not like, it's not like they have all the power in the world right now. But it's not obvious what the bargaining would be or what the deal would be, other than maybe some minor changes or a commitment to, revisit the Canada Disability Benefit at a future date. There's just not a lot of room here. So, again, I just don't know. I wish if there's one thing that I hope comes out of this confidence and supply agreement, it's that we just kill this idea that you have to wonder about an election every 2 weeks, because as much as it might be good for polling analysts, it's I just don't know that it makes a ton of sense otherwise.
I guess we're all old enough to remember the Harper Martin years when it was only about whether it was going to be an election. Stephanie, go ahead.
I was going to say, I mean, I guess if we want to like fantastically blue sky the whole thing, I mean, maybe it's time to rip up the supply and confidence agreement and start over, right? There's a lot of boxes that have been checked on this one. The New Democrats could say, again, I'm literally just wide, thinking here, right? But the New Democrats could say, okay, you know what? We've achieved pretty much the meat of what is in the supply and confidence agreement. We're going to support your budget. Now we'd like a new agreement, please. We would like you to promise to do more on the disability benefit, et cetera, so on and so forth, and kind of lay the stage for supply and confidence, part two in the 16 remaining months till the next scheduled election. Because you also have to wonder, again, there are a lot of check marks now beside all of those things in that deal. So is it continue to be worth the paper it's written on if everything's been accomplished? And Democrats can claim some kind of victory. Hey, we got all of these things. Okay, what else do we want? Maybe the budget vote is not the time to leverage that, but maybe it's leverage in the sense of, okay, we'll vote for your budget, and now we want a new agreement going forward.
We've now had a little bit over a week to kind of digest it. So let's talk a little bit about what the Liberals are hoping to come out of this budget. Aaron, if we try to take a little bit of the political kind of cynicism out of it, is this budget just a short-term electoral document, or does it have any elements of long-term planning? Is there anything in here that suggests that the Liberals believe that they'll win the next election and have to implement and have to live with this fiscal situation in 2026?
I guess to a certain extent, if you look at the housing changes and the housing accelerator in particular, and the zoning changes that it's pushing throughout sort of the whole system at various levels of government, that's not going to, the housing crisis is not going to be fixed by October 2025, right? And it's entirely possible that a Pierre Poilievre government is going to come into office and be quite thankful that the Liberals pushed a bunch of reforms through the system to make it easier to build houses in this country. The Conservatives have also been fairly quiet on capital gains, and that might be because it's politically treacherous to be seen to, at this point, be fighting a tax increase that is mainly going to impact the wealthiest Canadians. But they might also not hate having a little bit of extra revenue to play with. So there are, throughout this, the Liberals obviously have to deal with the housing situation, or be seen to be dealing with the housing situation, especially for young voters. If they're going to get reelected, they have to bring young voters back into the fold. There's obviously some short-term political advantages and angles that they're playing right now. But yeah, this is a budget that is going to have, one way or another, some fairly long-term ramifications. And if they were to come back into office, I suspect they would want, what's in this budget to kind of be lasting and set them up to either be reaping the rewards of a better housing market, or, to have some momentum going into, I guess, what would be a fourth term at that point.
Stephanie, platform or planning document?
It could be a platform, but maybe not for the 2025 election, right? Maybe it becomes the platform for, again, blue sky 2025, the Conservatives get a majority, the Liberals, I don't know what happens to them, but then let's say the next scheduled election, 2029, and the Liberals get to point to a bunch of new construction, because by 2029, it's not within the realm of possibility that some of these buildings are actually built, or at least there's something there. And say, hey, we did that for you. What did this guy do? They get to sort of twist the argument back around. The whole, well, when the Conservatives argue with the Liberals, well, they haven't built a single house in 8 years. And then they get to point to Mr. Poilievre and say, if it wasn't for us, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. So, when you talk about some of the Liberals' policies, and lots of people are, what are their legacy items, right? What are the things they're going to carry through long after they're gone? $10 a day childcare and its potential impact on the workforce may in fact be one, and this housing program may in fact turn out to be another, something that they can claim credit for much further down the road.
Aaron, I saw that you wrote about this. So the capital gains issue seemed like a winner. could still be a winner. Not sure based on some of the polling, because it seems like a significant number of Canadians, even those who are under the age of 30 or have a household income of less than 50,000, think that the capital gains increase to the inclusion rate will impact them right away. Tomorrow, they're going to be paying more on their capital gains of over $250,000 a year. I don't know. What is this still a winner? Did it get away from them in some way, in some fashion?
I don't know that it's gotten away from them yet. It was interesting to see that poll and the number of people who are under the age of 40 and who don't make a lot of money who suddenly think the capital gains is going to impact them.
They're all cottage owners.
Apparently, there are a lot of cottage owners in this country. So it's possible that, it's possible that people haven't really figured out what this change means yet, and that, people with longer data sets would be able to answer this for me. But whether anytime you mention taxes, people just automatically assume they're going to have to pay more regardless of what the actual policy is. So there's probably a communications challenge there that they still have to overcome of making clear to people that, at least as far as the government projects it, it's going to impact, 0.13% of taxpayers. I think the flip side of that is they also have to fight now this argument from the tech sector in particular and the venture capital world that this is going to harm investment and hurt the economy. There's enough concern about the state of the Canadian economy and productivity, although I can't imagine many people I don't understand what productivity is, so I can't imagine most people are deeply concerned about the actual productivity idea, but just the general feeling of the economy is stagnating, that there's probably some risk of losing the argument on whether this is a good change because it might hurt investment. I think generally speaking, polls say that taxing the rich is a pretty popular idea. So I think if the Liberals can bring it around to that, they still have a chance to win this argument. And I do think the other thing, and I pointed this out in my article, is that as much as the tech sector has come out and said, this is terrible, this is awful, there have been a few voices in that world who've come forward and said, are you sure about that? This doesn't seem that bad. And so I think the debate to that extent is far from over. The Liberals at least, maybe this is clearing a low bar, they at least seem to have put themselves in a better position and started this fight better than they started the one in 2017, when they put out a white paper and then let 3 months go by of outrage building up before they got around to responding to it. This time they seem to have come right out of the gate saying, here's what we're doing, here's why we're doing it. By all means, fight us on it, but this is why we're doing it. So I think they're at least better placed to win this debate, but I do think, we're going to have to see how it evolves over the next month or two.
Stephanie, what are your views on how this one is shaping up?
Interestingly enough, the capital gains tax is of a piece, right? I mean, they had other things in the budget that were were designed to take some of the sting out of the capital gains issue. So new, provisions and credits and systems for entrepreneurs, and some of the things that the tech sector, especially some of the more junior, smaller size tech companies, worried about acquisition, worried about losing all the money they put into their business. In theory, it's baked into the budget to solve for that question. It wasn't packaged cleanly in the announcement part, right? So all anybody really hears is taxes are going up. And you see that headline and you see that frustration, and then it's, well, no, we got to explain, and we got to this, and we got to that. And they're dancing around again like they always seem to needing to dance. I also think that it's unfair, to hang it on this 0.13% of Canadians, because that's 0.13% of people, of individuals. But you have all sorts of individuals who exist sort of from a business perspective as corporations, right? It's the way we're not going to get into the whole complicated tax structure of why they do it that way, but there are a lot of small businesses and independent contractors and gig workers and all sorts of people who exist in a system where this is potentially punitive for them. And when I say potentially punitive, the assumption, of course, is that you're going to cash out tomorrow. Like in a lot of cases, the sort of corporate structure that a lot of young independent businesses might use, that's designed to hedge against retirement, and their retirement is still 15 to 20 years off. So it's not as though they're worse off tomorrow. It's if this remains in place by the time they go to retire, they have a problem. Will it, won't it? I don't know. I do think, to Aaron's point, they were better prepared this time, and the changes are less significant than what they sort of originally floated in 2017. At a time, though, when you hear a lot of doctors and people in the healthcare profession doing what they do and, complaining and saying that this is a problem for them and it will make them lose their, make them close up or make them this, make them that, when generally speaking, the number one issue on many people's, not number one, certainly top three now, is healthcare, healthcare, healthcare. So anything that is seen as a punitive measure to the people who provide healthcare in this country, whether it's accurate or not accurate, politics is optics, it's not great optics. And it appears on that particular piece of it, they don't really have a clean answer other than to say, well, don't worry, young doctor, because in 20 years things will be different. That doesn't quite work here.
You do also get the sense from some of the polling that the Liberals might not be benefiting from the benefit of the doubt on these. That you see polls showing that, a majority of Canadians or plurality at the very least say they don't like the budget. They like some of the individual measures, but when you're talking about the budget as a whole, it's just associated with the government, and the government is not polling very well. So the budget then doesn't poll well, and anything that's in it that might raise taxes, I think a lot of people, like Stephanie says, might think that this is going to hit them in some way. Even if it's not technically the capital gains, maybe there'll be some knock-on effect on their ability to get a family doctor or to get a job somewhere. If the government was better positioned in public opinion, people might be more willing to trust it than they would be right now. So, Aaron, can they square this circle? Can they get around this issue?
I mean, I think you're right that there is kind of just a general assumption that if the Liberals announce something, it must be bad amongst a fair number of voters at this point. I think when you look at a lot of the polling on the budget, the people who say, this budget's bad, it's going to have a negative impact on me. I can't help but wonder how much of that is just, I do not like Justin Trudeau and this is his budget, therefore I don't like the budget. It is going to be a grind. They're going to have to grind away at this communications wise to make the case that this is a good change and it makes sense to do it. One of the things that I thought was interesting in the way Freeland presented it in the budget speech was to say, people might not like this tax change, but, we think, low-income Canadians should have dental care, and we believe women should have access to free contraception, and we believe, school lunches should be provided to more children. So they're at least connecting the revenue they're getting from it to things they want to spend money on. They're not just doing it because they believe this is an unfair taxation system. They're doing it, in their words, because they want to provide things of value. It is going to be an uphill climb still to get that through because, the papers that economists were writing about the capital gains tax, in the years leading up to this were pretty clear, which was, yes, capital gains, the inclusion rate on capital gains should go up, but people are going to be mad about it. It's going to impact people. And when you tell people that their taxes are going to go up, they get mad about it. And so you've got to be ready to deal with that. You can make all the sort of academic arguments in the world about why the inclusion rate should go up, but people will weigh it in terms of money lost or gained. And so I do think, the Liberals, for all of the praise that they have gotten in certain periods of time for their communication skills, sometimes when it comes down to complicated questions of policy, their communication skills aren't so hot. And so they are going to have to sell this budget. We talked a lot in the lead up to the budget about how they were selling the budget in terms of dribbling it out piece by piece. And I think that probably worked to sort of get more attention on what they were doing for housing. I think the strategy now needs to be carried forward even more so because they've got to sell a policy that isn't just helping people. It is going to, raise taxes for some people.
We saw a report in the Globe and Mail talking about how some Liberals are hoping they can get a 5-point bump out of this every 6 months. which mathematically makes sense because if they don't have a 5-point bump every 6 months, then they're going to be down 10, 20 points by the time of the next election. Stephanie, I'm almost more interested that this even was put out there because it sets a goal. And if by the spring, by the fall, or later in the spring, I should say, the Liberals don't have signs of improvement, it seems to me that this puts a lot of pressure on Justin Trudeau to make a decision, or at least to make a final decision on whether he's going to run again or not.
And perhaps that's a good thing, right? Perhaps we set these goals. You know, when you ask in government, remember deliverology? Remember the idea that, no, but I'm being serious, right? You're going to laugh at me. But
sorry, we shouldn't laugh at the references to deliverology, but yes.
Right, but just recall the whole point, right? The whole point was to have benchmarks against which we measure success. The entire public service, just as a for example, right, operates on service delivery. And did we meet this standard? And did we meet that standard? So if you're not setting goals for yourself, I mean, tangible, measurable ones, that you can then have a look at and say, well, man, like that didn't work. Now what? I think that's prudent management in some way. I mean, maybe it's politically very difficult to deal with and you can try and backpedal, you know, well, I said 5%, but like, you know, we're up 5% in like the 905. So is that good enough? Can we take that 5%? What's good enough there for them? But I do think it makes sense because you can't, you know, if there's a vibe sort of in Ottawa amongst all people that are connected to this world, it's, are we really going to keep on doing this for 16 more months? Like having these same conversations about, can Justin Trudeau, and you know, these are all great and interesting conversations, but at some point, I think the nation's ready to just kind of move on, move forward, make a decision, just do it, or we're just going to be in this spiral. And it seems counterproductive. You know, it seems counterproductive in getting things done for the country. It seems counterproductive for people's energy and ambition. And it's great to get all this housing stuff out the door, and it's good to sort of be making progress on other files that will really benefit, you know, some of the people in our country who really do need more support and more assistance. But if it's not politically delivering for you, then shouldn't you have to make a decision?
Aaron, did this ratchet up the pressure on Justin Trudeau? Like, because if you know it, and I know it, and Stephanie knows it, if they're not 5 points closer in October, it's going to be a question he's going to get almost every week.
Yeah, I mean, I have been told that the 5% thing isn't really a strategy. And I'm only willing to believe that because it would be a pretty crazy thing, I think, for the Liberals to set that strategy and then leak it to the Globe, because for the exact reason Steph puts her finger on, which is if the polls don't go up in 5 months or in 6 months, you suddenly look pretty bad. And so I don't know. I'm sure it's possible that there is some kind of strategy. I'm sure one assumes there's a strategy to improve their polling, but I don't know that there are benchmarks. But I do think implicitly the same kind of logic holds, which is if 6 months from now the polls haven't budged, the questions about Justin Trudeau are just going to be as loud as ever. And so the thing I would look for, or I wonder about still, is anybody going to push? You know, Mark Carney comes out and gives these speeches. Is he going to come forward and say, I think Justin Trudeau should step down? Is he going to come forward and say, I would be interested in the job, or I think I should lead the Liberal Party? Are any of the people who are there fans of his in caucus who are going to do that and say that? Because really, one of the remarkable things at this point is that the voices of internal dissent have been pretty quiet so far. And there haven't been the kind of loud pushes, you know, other than, you know, Percy Down or a couple other people. There really haven't been sort of loud public demands for Trudeau to resign. And, you know, I just don't know that he's going to leave, even if the polling is bad. I don't know that a leader steps aside of his own volition unless someone is kind of pushing and saying, you need to get out or this is going to get ugly. And so I'm interested, as much as I'm interested in the polls, I'm interested to see whether there's any kind of internal dissent. And then I think the other consideration here, to a certain extent, is just timing. I think they're running out of time to make a leadership change. You can throw a leadership race together pretty quickly and do it, on an expedited basis. But in terms of getting a new leader in place and presenting a spring budget for 2025 and getting everything in order to run a campaign, they don't have a ton of time on their hands right now. And so even if there is a desire to get Trudeau out, if there are people who would like to see a different leader, I don't know how, in terms of if you want to set the next guy or gal up for success, you're running pretty short on time to do that.
We'll just close on this quickly because I'm not sure what the answer is. But Stephanie, did anything change for the Conservatives over the last 2 weeks?
I was talking to a Conservative, maybe it was last week, and I don't remember what I said. It was about the budget, and I said something, and they said, well, this is their time. Let them have it, let them have their day,
generous.
let them have in the sense of let them go out and have a budget and get attacked for it, and we don't need to do anything. We can just sort of sit back, and we're obviously not going to support it. We were never going to support it. So, there are news cycles where it feels like Pierre Poilievre is really driving the agenda, right? And he's pushing forward the issues, and it'll be interesting to see, with this big announcement with Honda today and the new tax credits, does Poilievre seize on that in some capacity? Probably not. So, they take their cyclical turn, right, to sort of disappear back into the hedge like Homer Simpson and be like, let's just let those guys do their own thing and we'll come out later. What that allows them to do sometimes, I think, is do things like they're doing, putting Mr. Poilievre out on tour, putting his wife out on tour, doing things that are out of the headlines, or in the case of Mr. Poilievre, accidentally grabbing the headlines with some of his meetings on the road. And okay, they don't have to be front and center all the time. They are the official opposition. It's clear they won't vote on the budget. So what else is there to do? Then, sometimes I know that Conservatives will say they spend too much time sometimes screaming about Justin Trudeau. Just let him do his own damage to himself, because he'll do it and he's already doing it. So let it be, is sometimes their philosophy. And I think on budget week, it's an example of them not needing to really do anything at all. And their polls will stay strong, and they'll come up with something else to fight on, maybe when we come back next week.
Aaron, did anything change for the Conservatives over the last 2 weeks? Something new for them to hit on, or not?
I don't think so. I think Steph's right that the Conservative, I think it would be, the Conservatives could pretty safely assume that the press gallery and the public's attention on the budget will drift pretty quickly if history is any judge. And so, they don't necessarily need to pick the budget as the hill to die on. I don't know even whether there's that much they want to be seen objecting to in the budget, to be honest. Capital gains for one thing, and the housing plan and pharmacare and things like that. I don't know that the Conservatives would be better off fighting, picking big fights over these things. I think the Liberals would be very happy to have the Conservatives fight about those things. The pit stop, whatever it was 2 days ago, I think that's an interesting part of a longer kind of trend story about, Pierre Poilievre and sort of the support he's courting and whether there's any kind of downside to that. But that's a kind of a longer piece. I don't know that, there's anything the Conservatives need to be deeply worried about for the exact same reasons, as we were saying. The polls don't suggest that the public is in love with this budget and has completely changed its mind about Justin Trudeau. And so staying out of the fray and, trying to kind of carry on with your own message, I think probably makes a lot of sense for the Conservatives. If there's anything in this budget if there's anything here that's kind of happened over the last few weeks that could end up pinching the Conservatives at some point, is when they have to get around to putting out a platform and when they have to account for these new spending initiatives and these new programs. And, Mr. Poilievre gave an interview, I think it was last week, where he said, well, all these new programs, they aren't up and running. They haven't changed anything. And I that's a fair criticism at this moment. I don't know that it's going to be a fair criticism in October 2025. And at that point, when he has to put together a platform that explains how he's going to cut taxes and shrink government, he's going to have to maybe account for these things. The flip side of that may be that the public doesn't care at that point and just wants to be rid of Justin Trudeau. So no, I don't think anything has massively changed for the Conservatives, but there are a few things that, a year from now we may still be talking about.
Or maybe 2 weeks from now, if the NDP decides to vote against the budget. Anybody want to bet that the NDP is going to vote down the budget? Any takers on that?
No, I'll pass.
No.
No? Okay. All right. Well, then we'll see what happens over the next couple of weeks. We have a pretty good idea, but we'll wait and see. That's why they actually play the games. Okay, Stephanie, Aaron, thanks so much for joining me. I really appreciate it today.
Thanks, Eric.